The wagon burned so hot that Tessa Fletcher could feel her eyebrows singeing even from 20 feet away, watching everything she owned in this world turn to ash and smoke against the vast Nebraska sky. She stood frozen on the dusty trail, her dress torn at the shoulder, a bruise already forming purple and angry across her cheekbone where one of the bandits had struck her when she tried to fight back. The other travelers who had been part of their small wagon train lay scattered across the prairie grass, some groaning, some silent and still. The bandits had come at dawn like devils from hell itself, 6 men with bandanas covering their faces and guns that spoke louder than any words. They had taken everything: horses, supplies, money, jewelry, even the photograph of her parents that she had carried all the way from Ohio. The only reason they had left her alive was because she had nothing else to give. Tessa was 23 years old and had been traveling to Fort Kearny, Nebraska, where her brother had promised her work at his trading post. Now she had no wagon, no supplies, no money, and no way to reach him. The September sun beat down mercilessly as she stared at the destruction around her. 2 families had been traveling with her, the Johnsons and the Pratts. Mr. Johnson was dead, shot when he tried to protect his wife. Mrs. Johnson sat rocking back and forth, keening a sound that made Tessa's blood run cold. The Pratts had scattered into the tall grass when the shooting started, and she could hear Mr. Pratt calling for his son somewhere in the distance. She needed to move, needed to help, needed to do something other than stand here like a statue while her future went up in smoke. But her legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to this cursed spot where her dreams had died. That was when she heard the horse. A single rider came over the rise to the east, and Tessa's heart seized with terror. The bandits were coming back. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but there was nothing but open prairie for miles. The rider came closer, and she could make out more details. A large man on a massive bay horse, wearing buckskin and fur despite the heat. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had been born in the saddle. As he drew near, Tessa saw that he was not one of the bandits. This man was bigger, broader across the shoulders, with long, dark hair that fell past his collar and a thick beard that covered the lower half of his face. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of steel, sharp and assessing. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance, his jaw tightening beneath the beard. How long ago? His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside. Tessa found her voice, though it shook. An hour, maybe less. They rode west. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and Tessa took an involuntary step back. He was enormous, at least 6.5 feet tall, with muscles that strained against his buckskin shirt. His arms were thick as tree trunks, his hands large enough to crush rocks. He moved past her without another word and went to check on Mrs. Johnson, crouching down beside the weeping woman with surprising gentleness. "Madam," he said quietly, "Madam, I need you to breathe. Your young ones need you to be strong right now." Mrs. Johnson looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, then slowly nodded. She had 3 children, Tessa remembered. They had been hiding in the back of the wagon when the attack started. The man helped her to her feet and guided her away from her husband's body. He spent the next half hour taking control of the situation with the kind of calm authority that made everyone else fall in line. He helped Mr. Pratt find his son, who had a twisted ankle but was otherwise unharmed. He checked the wounded, which included Mr. Pratt's wife, who had taken a bullet to the shoulder but would live. He organized a burial for Mr. Johnson and the 2 drivers who had also been killed. Through it all, Tessa watched him work, this mountain of a man who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to say. When the dead were in the ground and the wounded were as comfortable as could be managed, he finally turned his attention back to Tessa. "You hurt?" he asked, his eyes lingering on the bruise on her face. "No, not really." She touched her cheek self-consciously. "Nothing that will not heal." He nodded slowly, then looked at what remained of her wagon. The fire had burned itself out, leaving nothing but a blackened skeleton and ash. "That yours?" "Was mine," she corrected. "I'd been traveling to Fort Kearny. My brother runs a trading post there. I was supposed to help him run it." "Fort Kearny is still 2 days west on foot," the man said, "maybe 3 with wounded." He glanced at the Pratts and Mrs. Johnson with her children. "They cannot make that journey, not in their condition." "What are you suggesting?" Tessa asked. "My cabin is half a day north from here, up in the Pine Ridge foothills. It is not much, but there is shelter, water, food. I can take the wounded there, get them stable, then ride for Fort Kearney and bring back help." "Mrs." Johnson spoke up, her voice hoarse from crying. "Why would you do this for us? You do not even know us." The man was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone did the same for me once, when I had nothing. Because it is the right thing to do." He looked at each of them in turn. "My name is Yates Sutherland. I have been living up in those hills for the past 8 years, trapping and hunting. I give you my word that you will be safe." Tessa studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but all she saw was steady resolve. She had heard stories about mountain men, wild hermits who lived alone and went half crazy from the solitude, but there was nothing crazy in Yates Sutherland's eyes. If anything, he seemed more grounded and present than anyone she had met in months. "I think we should go with him," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "We do not have any other choice." The others agreed, though Mrs. Johnson looked fearful, and Mr. Pratt kept his rifle close. Yates fashioned a travois from some of the unburned wood and leather, loading Mrs. Pratt onto it so his horse could pull her. The rest of them would walk. He gave Tessa his canteen without a word, and she drank gratefully, the water cool and clean. They set out north as the sun climbed higher, leaving the burned wagons and fresh graves behind. Tessa walked near the front of the small group, close to where Yates led his horse. She found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. His arms, bare to the elbow where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle and marked with old scars. He was the kind of man who looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all rough edges and raw strength. "How long have you been in Nebraska?" she asked after they had been walking for an hour. 8 years, like I said. Came out here after the war." "Which side?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, but Yates did not seem offended. "Union, Iowa infantry. Saw too much death. Decided I wanted to see nothing but trees and sky for a while." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brings a woman alone all the way out here?" "I am not alone. Or I was not. My brother came out 2 years ago after his wife died. Said he needed a fresh start. He wrote and asked if I would join him, help him with the post." She looked down at her ruined dress, the dust coating her boots. "I guess that is not going to happen now." "Why not?" "I have nothing. No money, no supplies, not even a change of clothes. I cannot show up at my brother's door like a beggar." Yates stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just gray but had flecks of blue in them, like storm clouds. "Those bandits took your things, not your worth. Your brother asked you to come, which means he wants you there. Show up empty-handed and alive, and I guarantee he will be grateful." Tessa felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of fear and shame that she had been carrying since the attack. "You do not understand. I was supposed to be building a new life. I saved for 2 years to afford this trip. Everything I owned was in that wagon." "Then I will help you get new things," Yates said simply. "You can stay at my cabin until you are ready to go to Fort Kearney. I have furs to trade, supplies to spare. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better about accepting help." "I could not possibly repay you." "Then do not." He started walking again, clearly considering the matter settled. "Help me take care of these folks. Help me around the cabin for a few weeks while they heal up, and we will call it even." Tessa stared at his broad back, completely stunned. She had known this man for less than 3 hours, and he was offering her everything: shelter, food, supplies, kindness. It made no sense. People did not do things like this, not in her experience. There was always a price, always an expectation. But as the day wore on and she watched Yates carefully tend to Mrs. Pratt's wound during their rest stop, as she saw him crouch down to talk to Mrs. Johnson's youngest child with infinite patience, as she noticed the way he made sure everyone drank enough water and stayed in the shade as much as possible, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he meant what he said. The landscape gradually changed as they walked north. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, and pine trees began to appear in scattered clusters. The air smelled different here, fresher and cleaner, with the sharp scent of evergreen. As the sun started to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they crested a hill, and Tessa saw Yates's cabin for the first time. It sat in a small valley between two pine-covered slopes, built from thick logs chinked with mud. A stream ran beside it, clear and cold from the sound it made as it rushed over the rocks. There was a small barn, a smokehouse, and what looked like a root cellar dug into the hillside. It was not much, as Yates had said, but after the horror of the morning, it looked like paradise. "Home," Yates said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Tessa look at him. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. This was a place he had built with his own hands, carved out of the wilderness through sheer determination and hard work. Getting everyone settled took the rest of the evening. Yates gave up his bed for Mrs. Pratt and made pallets on the floor for the others. He showed Tessa where his supplies were kept and let her take charge of feeding everyone, which gave her something to focus on besides the constant replay of the attack in her mind. She found his stores impressive and well organized. Dried meat, flour, beans, cornmeal, even some preserved vegetables. He had not been lying when he said he had supplies to spare. While she cooked a simple stew, Yates tended to Mrs. Pratt's wound again, cleaning it carefully and rebandaging it with strips of clean cloth. His hands, so large and rough, moved with surprising delicacy. Tessa found herself watching those hands and wondering what they would feel like. The thought came unbidden and made her face heat with embarrassment. She turned her attention back to the stew, stirring it vigorously. After everyone had eaten and the children were asleep, the adults gathered near the fireplace. Mr. Pratt spoke first, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Sutherland. You saved us today, all of us." "Yates," the mountain man said, "no need for formality, not after a day like today." "Do you think they will come after us?" Mrs. Johnson asked fearfully. "Those bandits?" "No," Yates said with certainty. "They got what they wanted and moved on. Bandits do not waste time chasing down folks who have nothing left to steal. Besides, they will not know where you went. There is no trail leading here, and I know how to cover tracks." He looked at each of them. "You are safe here. I give you my word." That night, Tessa lay on her pallet near the fireplace, listening to the breathing of the other people crowded into the cabin. She should have been exhausted enough to fall asleep immediately, but her mind would not stop racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bandits, saw Mr. Johnson falling, saw her wagon burning. She saw her mother's photograph curling up in the flames. She must have made some sound, because a shadow moved in the darkness and Yates crouched down beside her. "Cannot sleep?" he asked quietly. "No," she whispered back. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it all again." He was silent for a moment, then said, "It will get easier. Not quickly, but it will. The mind needs time to heal, just like the body does. You sound like you know from experience." "I do." He sat down on the floor beside her pallet, his back against the wall. "After the war, I could not sleep for months. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on the battlefield. It took time and silence and these mountains to heal that wound." Tessa rolled onto her side so she could see him in the firelight. His face was half in shadow, making him look even more rugged and imposing. "Do you ever regret coming out here, living alone?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Humans are not meant to be solitary creatures, but I needed the quiet more than I needed company." He glanced down at her. "Until today, I had not spoken to another person in nearly 2 months. That's a long time to be alone." "It is, but it's also peaceful." He stretched his long legs out in front of him. "You should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another hard day." But he did not leave, and Tessa found his presence comforting. There was something solid and reliable about him, like the mountains themselves. She felt safer with him sitting beside her in the dark than she had felt in months of traveling. Eventually, her eyes grew heavy, and she drifted off with the sound of his steady breathing as her lullaby. She woke at dawn to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Yates was already up, cooking breakfast for everyone with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. He had washed and shaved while she slept, and she could see more of his face now. He was younger than she had initially thought, maybe 30 or 31, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often but would be devastating when it did. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Yates rode to Fort Kearney to send word to the authorities about the bandits and to fetch a doctor for Mrs. Pratt. He returned with medicine and news that her brother had been notified and would come to collect her as soon as possible. The doctor came 2 days later, an older man with kind eyes who examined Mrs. Pratt and declared that Yates had done an excellent job caring for her wound. "You have a talent for healing," the doctor told him. "Ever think about studying medicine?" Yates just shook his head. "I prefer fixing problems that do not talk back." Tessa found herself laughing at that, the first real laugh since the attack. Yates looked at her in surprise, and for just a moment she saw the corner of his mouth quirk up, almost a smile. It transformed his whole face, softening the harsh lines and making him look less like a mountain and more like a man. As the others healed, Tessa threw herself into helping around the cabin. She cooked and cleaned, tended the garden patch behind the cabin, helped Yates preserve meat for the coming winter. He taught her how to tan leather, how to identify animal tracks, how to read the sky for coming weather. She was a quick learner, and he seemed pleased with her progress, though he rarely said so out loud. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their lives before. She learned that he had grown up on a farm in Iowa, that he had a sister somewhere in Illinois that he had not seen in 5 years, that his favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just before full dark. He learned that she had worked as a seamstress in Ohio, that she had never been particularly good at it, but had done it because it was respectable, that what she really loved was cooking and the way food could bring people together. "You are good at it," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset behind the mountains. "Cooking, I mean. That stew you made tonight was better than anything I've eaten in years." "That is only because you have been eating your own cooking for so long," she teased. "Fair point," he conceded, and there it was again, that almost smile. 2 weeks after the attack, a wagon arrived from Fort Kearny. Tessa's brother Thomas was driving, and he jumped down before the horses had even fully stopped. He was 10 years older than Tessa, with graying hair and the same green eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. He pulled her into a fierce hug that lifted her off her feet. "Thank God," he said into her hair. "When I got word about the attack, I thought I had lost you too." "I am fine," she assured him, though tears were running down her face. "Yates saved us, saved all of us." Thomas turned to Yates and extended his hand. "Thomas Fletcher, I owe you more than I can ever repay." Yates shook his hand briefly. "No debt. I did what anyone would do." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You did what a good man would do. There is a difference." The Johnsons and the Pratts would be going back to Fort Kearny with Thomas, who had brought supplies in an extra wagon. Mrs. Pratt was well enough to travel now, and they were all eager to return to civilization. Tessa should have been packing her few belongings and preparing to go with them. Her brother was here. Fort Kearny was waiting. Her new life could finally begin. But as she watched everyone load into the wagons, as she said her goodbyes to the families she had survived with, she felt a strange reluctance weighing down her feet. She glanced back at the cabin, at Yates standing on the porch with his arms crossed over his broad chest, watching the proceedings with his usual stoic expression. The past 2 weeks had been strange and difficult, but they had also been good in a way she could not quite articulate. She had felt useful here, needed, maybe even wanted. Thomas noticed her hesitation. "Tessa, are you ready to go?" She opened her mouth to say yes, but what came out was, "Could I stay a little longer?" Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at her. Thomas frowned in confusion. "Stay? Why?" Tessa scrambled for a reasonable explanation. "Yates helped us so much. The least I can do is help him prepare for winter. He's been so generous, and I feel like I have barely repaid that kindness." She looked at her brother imploringly. "Just another few weeks. Then I will come to Fort Kearny, I promise." Thomas looked between her and Yates, and something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or concern. "Tessa, can I talk to you privately for a moment?" They walked a short distance from the wagons, and Thomas took her hands in his. "Tess, I need you to be honest with me. Are you staying because you want to help, or because of him?" "Both," she admitted, because she had never been good at lying to her brother. "He is different, Thomas. He is kind and strong and decent, and I just need more time to figure out what this feeling is." "What feeling?" She struggled to find the words. "Like I'm supposed to be here, with him. I know it is crazy. I've only known him for 2 weeks. But when I think about leaving, about never seeing him again, something in my chest hurts. Thomas sighed and pulled her into another hug. You're a grown woman, Tess. I cannot tell you what to do, but I can tell you to be careful. Mountain men are different. They live different lives. Make sure you know what you are getting into before you get in too deep. I will, she promised. He pulled back and studied her face. You look happy, scared, but happy. I have not seen that look on your face in years. He smiled sadly. Stay. But if you need me, if anything happens, you send word and I will come get you immediately. Thank you, she whispered. After the wagons rolled away, Tessa walked back to the cabin where Yates still stood on the porch. He watched her approach with an unreadable expression. You did not have to stay, he said. I know. Why did you? She climbed the steps until she was standing in front of him, having to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Because I want to. Because I'm not ready to leave yet. She took a breath. Unless you want me to go. If I am in your way, I can catch up with the wagons. You're not in my way. His voice was rough, rougher than usual. Having you here has been good. The cabin feels less empty. It was not a declaration of love or even affection, but coming from Yates Sutherland, it felt like one. Tessa smiled. Then I will stay, at least until the first snow. Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly to identify. That gives us about 6 weeks. Then we better not waste them. The next 6 weeks were the best of Tessa's life. With the others gone, the cabin felt both more spacious and more intimate. She and Yates moved around each other with increasing ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits. She woke before dawn to make coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to strip paint. He brought her wildflowers that he claimed he just happened upon during his hunting trips. They worked side by side during the day and sat together on the porch each evening, talking until the stars came out. Slowly, Yates began to open up. He told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, about the nightmares that still came sometimes. She told him about her parents' deaths from fever, about the loneliness of trying to make a life in Ohio after they were gone, about her dreams of having a family of her own someday. He listened to everything she said with complete attention, never dismissing her feelings or trying to fix things, just being present. One crisp October afternoon, he took her hunting. He taught her how to track deer, how to move silently through the forest, how to read the signs that animals left behind. When they came across a young buck, he handed her his rifle. You try, he said quietly. I have never shot anything before, she protested. Time to learn. He stood behind her, positioning the rifle against her shoulder, his hands covering hers on the weapon, his chest pressed against her back, solid and warm, and Tessa had to concentrate hard to focus on the deer instead of on the way her heart was racing. Breathe slow, squeeze the trigger gentle, do not pull it. She did as he instructed, and the rifle cracked loud in the quiet forest. The buck startled and bounded away, unharmed. Tessa lowered the weapon, disappointed. I missed. You were close. See that tree? He pointed to a pine about 10 feet from where the deer had been standing. You hit about there. For your first shot ever, that's impressive. Really? Really. He took the rifle from her and slung it over his shoulder. We will practice more. By winter, you will be bringing down deer like you were born to it. She turned to face him, still standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back. Why are you doing all this? Teaching me, I mean. I'm going to leave soon. This knowledge will not do me much good in Fort Kearney. Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Maybe I'm hoping you will decide not to go. Her breath caught. Yates. I know I've got no right to ask you to stay, he continued, the words coming faster now, like he needed to get them out before he lost his nerve. I am just a mountain man with nothing to offer but a rough cabin and a rough life. You deserve better. You deserve a proper house in a proper town with a proper man who knows how to talk pretty and make you laugh. But I cannot stop thinking that maybe you belong here, with me, in this place. Tessa reached up and placed her hand against his bearded cheek. He froze at the contact, his eyes going wide. You make me laugh, she said softly. Maybe not often, but when you do, it is genuine. And you do talk, more than you probably have in years. You talk to me, Yates. You let me in. That is worth more than pretty words. Tessa. Her name was a rough whisper on his lips. I do not want to go to Fort Kearney, she continued. I thought I did. I thought that was where I was supposed to build my life. But being here with you, I have realized something. A life is not about the place. It is about the person you build it with. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his face. You are sure? This life is hard. Winters are brutal. We are miles from town. It gets lonely and cold and sometimes dangerous. I am sure, she said. I have never been more sure of anything. He stared at her for another heartbeat, and then he kissed her. It was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and claiming, his lips hard against hers, one hand cupping the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist and pulled her tight against him. Tessa made a small sound of surprise that turned into a sigh of pleasure as she melted into him. He was so solid, so strong, like kissing the mountain itself. She felt safe and wanted and cherished all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why did you wait so long? Scared you would pull away, scared you would look at me like I was some kind of animal. Never, she said fiercely. You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Sutherland. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. When he pulled back, there was a smile on his face, a real, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and showed his teeth. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, and Tessa felt herself falling even deeper in love with this rough, gentle mountain man. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the hunting forgotten. That evening, Yates rode into Fort Kearney and returned with a preacher. Thomas came too, looking concerned until he saw the expression on Tessa's face. Then he just laughed and shook his head. I should have known, he said, pulling her aside. You have that same stubborn look Mama used to get when she had made up her mind about something. You are not angry? How could I be angry? You're glowing, Tess. I have never seen you so happy. He glanced over at Yates, who was talking with the preacher. He is a good man, rough around the edges but solid. Just promise me you will come visit sometimes. I do not want to lose touch with you. I promise, she said, hugging him tight. They were married that night in front of the fireplace, with Thomas and the preacher as witnesses. Tessa wore the only dress she owned, still dusty from the trail, and Yates wore his buckskins. They had no rings, but Yates tied a leather cord around her finger and promised to carve her something better. She did not care about rings or fancy dresses or any of it. All she cared about was the way he looked at her when he said his vows, like she was the most precious thing in his world. After Thomas and the preacher left, Yates carried Tessa to his bed, their bed now, and loved her with the same intensity he brought to everything else. His hands, so large and rough from years of hard work, were infinitely gentle as they explored her body. He worshipped her with touches and kisses, learning every curve and hollow, every place that made her gasp or sigh. When he finally joined his body to hers, Tessa wrapped herself around him and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. They moved together in the firelight, and when she shattered in his arms, she cried out his name like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the furs, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. Yates traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder, his expression soft and content. I never thought I would have this, he said quietly. A wife, someone to share this life with. After the war, I thought I was too broken, too rough for any woman to want. Tessa propped herself up on her elbow so she could look down at him. You are not broken. You are strong. You survived things that would have destroyed other men, and you came out the other side, still able to be kind, still able to care. That does not make you broken, Yates. That makes you remarkable. He pulled her down for a long, slow kiss. How did I get so lucky? He murmured against her lips. We both got lucky, she corrected. Those bandits took everything I had, but then I found you, and you gave me everything you had. I would say that makes us even. Even, he agreed, smiling. I like the sound of that. That first winter was hard but joyful. Snow came early and heavy, trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. But Tessa did not mind. She had Yates, and that was enough. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and learning each other in every way possible. He taught her to play chess using pieces he carved from wood. She taught him to dance, humming waltzes she remembered from church socials back in Ohio. They were terrible at it, both of them, but they laughed until their sides hurt. Yates proved to be an attentive and passionate husband. He could not keep his hands off her, stealing kisses while she cooked, pulling her into his lap while they sat by the fire, making love to her slowly and thoroughly every night until she was boneless with pleasure. He told her she was beautiful, over and over, until she almost believed it. He showed her in 1,000 small ways that she was cherished. Tessa threw herself into making the cabin a home. She sewed curtains from fabric that Yates bought on his rare trips to town. She made cushions for the chairs and braided a rug for the floor. She organized his somewhat chaotic supplies and started planning a bigger garden for spring. Yates watched her work with quiet satisfaction, and she knew he was pleased to see his solitary space transformed into something warmer and more welcoming. In February, Tessa realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing to Yates at first, not wanting to get his hopes up until she was certain. But when the nausea started, gentle at first but growing stronger, she knew. She was pregnant. She told him on a bright winter morning when the sun made the snow sparkle like diamonds. They were sitting at the table eating breakfast when she set down her fork and said, "Yates, I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I do not think it is wrong. I hope you will not think it is wrong." She was rambling, nerves making her tongue clumsy. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Tessa, whatever it is, just tell me." "I am with child," she said in a rush. "Our child. You are going to be a father." Yates went completely still, his face blank with shock. For a terrible moment, Tessa thought he was upset. Then he pushed back from the table so fast his chair fell over, and he was around the table and pulling her into his arms before she could draw a breath. He lifted her clean off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully like she might break. "We are having a baby." "You are happy?" she asked, though the answer was written all over his face. "Happy? Tessa, I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can possibly say." He dropped to his knees in front of her and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Tears streamed down Tessa's face as she ran her fingers through his long hair. This man, this rough mountain man who had given her everything when she had nothing, was going to be the father of her child. Life was strange and beautiful, and more perfect than she had ever imagined it could be. The pregnancy was not easy. The sickness lasted well into her 4th month. There were days when Tessa could barely keep anything down. Yates hovered over her constantly, worried and helpless in the face of her discomfort. He made her weak tea and dry toast, held her hair back when she got sick, rubbed her back when she could not sleep. He was so gentle and patient that it made her love him even more. As spring arrived and her belly began to swell, Yates became almost comically overprotective. He would not let her lift anything heavier than a book. He insisted she rest constantly. He rode to Fort Kearny and returned with a doctor, a young man named James, who examined Tessa and declared her and the baby perfectly healthy. "Your husband is more nervous than any father I have ever seen," James told her with amusement. "I would not be surprised if he wears a hole in the floor pacing before this baby arrives." "He just cares," Tessa said, watching through the window as Yates chopped wood with more force than was strictly necessary. "He has already lost so much in his life. I think he is scared to lose us too." That night she confronted him about it. "Yates, you have to stop treating me like I am made of glass. I am pregnant, not dying." "I know that," he said, but his jaw was tight with tension. "Then what is this really about?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "My mother died giving birth to my youngest sister. I was 12. I watched my father fall apart afterward. He was never the same. The fear that ate at him, the grief, it destroyed him." He looked at her and his eyes were haunted. "I cannot lose you, Tessa. I would not survive it." She went to him and wrapped her arms around him as much as her belly would allow. "You are not going to lose me. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong, and the baby is strong, and Dr. James said everything looks perfect. I know all that, but the fear is still there. Then we face it together, she said firmly. You and me, just like we face everything else. But you cannot protect me from life. Yates, you can only stand beside me and hold my hand through it. He held her close and buried his face in her hair. I will try, but I make no promises about the pacing. She laughed despite the seriousness of the moment. I can live with pacing. Summer came in a riot of wildflowers and green grass. Tessa's belly grew round and full, and she felt the baby moving inside her, tiny flutters at first that grew into strong kicks. Yates loved to place his big hands on her stomach and feel the baby move. His face would light up with wonder every time, and he would talk to the baby, telling it stories about the mountains and the animals and promising to teach it everything he knew. Thomas visited in July, bringing gifts for the baby and news from Fort Kearney. The trading post was doing well, he said. The town was growing. But he looked around at the cabin, at the garden Tessa had expanded, at the obvious love between his sister and her husband, and he seemed content that she had made the right choice. You look good, Tess, he said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Being loved agrees with you. It does, she agreed, one hand resting on her belly where the baby was doing gymnastics. I never thought I could be this happy, Thomas. Every morning I wake up and think surely this is all a dream. But it is real. All of it. You deserve it, he said, squeezing her hand. After everything you have been through, you deserve every bit of happiness you can find. The baby came in late August, on a day when the heat hung heavy and thick. Tessa's pains started just after dawn, and Yates immediately rode for the doctor, returning with both James and a midwife named Martha, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and hard. Tessa had heard other women talk about childbirth, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was intense, all-consuming, coming in waves that left her gasping and crying out. Through it all, Yates stayed by her side, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to leave bruises, wiping her face with cool water, murmuring encouragement. You're doing so well, love, he told her as another contraction peaked. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. I cannot, she sobbed. Yates, I cannot. You can, you are, just a little longer. The sun was setting when Martha finally said, One more push, Tessa. Give me one more big push. Tessa bore down with the last of her strength, and suddenly there was a release of pressure, and a thin, angry wail filled the cabin. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure. A boy, Martha announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. You have a son. Yates made a choked sound, and when Tessa looked at him, there were tears streaming down his face into his beard. Martha placed the baby on Tessa's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect person they had created. He had a shock of dark hair and was screaming his outrage at being forced out into the cold world. Hello, little one, Tessa whispered, touching his downy head with one trembling finger. We have been waiting for you. The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes trying to focus on her face. Yates leaned over them both, one big hand cradling the baby's head with infinite gentleness. He is perfect, Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. Tessa, he is absolutely perfect. They named him Jacob Thomas Sutherland, after Yates's father and Tessa's brother. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's steel-gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Yates was completely besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. He fashioned a cradle from wood and lined it with the softest furs. He walked the floor at night when Jacob fussed, singing old war songs in his rough voice until the baby settled. Tessa watched her husband transform into a father and fell in love with him all over again. The fear that had gripped him during her pregnancy melted away in the face of his fierce love for their son. He was gentle and patient, changing diapers and giving baths without complaint, protective but not smothering. The first time Jacob smiled, a real smile and not just gas, Yates actually teared up. He smiled at me, he said in wonder. Tessa, he smiled at me. Of course he did, she said, kissing her husband's bearded cheek. You are his papa, his hero. As Jacob grew from an infant into a chubby, curious baby, life settled into a new rhythm. Tessa balanced caring for Jacob with running the household, while Yates hunted and trapped and made regular trips to Fort Kearny to trade furs and buy supplies. Money was not plentiful, but they had everything they needed: food, shelter, warmth, and most importantly, love. When Jacob was 8 months old and trying his best to crawl, Tessa realized she was pregnant again. She told Yates on a cold November evening, and once again he reacted with pure joy, though this time without quite as much panic. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, pulling her into his lap in the rocking chair he had made. "Two babies so close together will be hard." "I feel blessed," she said honestly. "A little overwhelmed maybe, but blessed. Our family is growing, Yates. We are building something beautiful here." "We are," he agreed, kissing her temple. "Something I never thought I would have. A wife, children, a home. You gave me all of that, Tessa." "You gave it to me too," she reminded him. "We gave it to each other." Their daughter was born in June, on a day when the meadow was full of wildflowers. The labor was faster this time, only 6 hours from start to finish, and when Martha placed the baby girl in Tessa's arms, she felt complete in a way she had not even known was possible. "She has your hair," Yates said, touching the soft blonde fuzz on the baby's head. "She's going to be beautiful, just like her mother." They named her Sarah Rose, and she was the opposite of her brother in every way. Where Jacob had been calm and easy, Sarah was fierce and demanding. She wanted what she wanted when she wanted it, and she made her displeasure known loudly if her needs were not immediately met. Yates loved her ferocity, said it reminded him of Tessa. "I was not fierce," Tessa protested one evening as she nursed the wailing Sarah while trying to keep Jacob from climbing on the furniture. "You stood up to those bandits," Yates said, plucking Jacob out of danger and setting him on the floor with his carved wooden horses. "You chose to stay in the middle of nowhere with a man you barely knew. You brought a baby into the world twice now, through sheer determination. You are the fiercest person I know." She smiled at him over Sarah's head. "Well, when you put it that way." The years passed in a blur of small moments that added up to a life. Jacob's first steps taken on a snowy December morning. Sarah's first word, which was not mama or papa but dog, yelled at a confused coyote that wandered too close to the cabin. The morning Tessa woke to find Yates had carved her a rocking chair, smooth and perfect, with roses carved into the back. The night he held her while she cried over a letter informing them that her brother Thomas had died suddenly of a heart ailment. Through it all, the love between Tessa and Yates only deepened. They still sat on the porch every evening after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing. He still brought her wildflowers. She still made his coffee exactly the way he liked it. They made love regularly, passionately, their desire for each other never fading. And every night before they fell asleep, Yates would pull her close and whisper, "Thank you for staying." And she would whisper back, "Thank you for giving me a reason to." When Jacob was 5 and Sarah was 4, Tessa became pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was older now, 29, and her body did not bounce back as quickly. The sickness was worse, the fatigue more intense. But Yates was there every step of the way, taking over more of the household duties, entertaining the children so she could rest, worrying but trying not to show it. This baby, another boy, came 3 weeks early on a stormy October night. The road to Fort Kearny was impassable with mud and flooding, so Yates had to deliver the baby himself with only Tessa's instructions to guide him. She had never been more proud of him than she was that night, watching him conquer his fear to bring their son safely into the world. "You did it," she said weakly as he placed the squalling infant on her chest. "Yates, you did it." "We did it," he corrected, his hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. "God, Tessa, that was the most terrifying thing I have ever done." "You were perfect," she assured him, "calm and capable. Our son could not ask for a better father." They named him Daniel James, after Yates's best friend who had died in the war and the doctor who had helped them so much. He was a quiet baby, easy like Jacob had been, content to lie in his cradle and observe the world with serious gray eyes. The cabin that had seemed so spacious when Tessa first arrived was now bursting at the seams with children and noise and life. Yates started planning an addition, and the next summer he built 2 more rooms onto the back of the cabin with help from neighbors who had slowly moved into the area. The mountains were not quite as isolated as they had been 8 years ago. There was a small community now, a dozen families scattered across the hillsides, and they helped each other with building and harvests and birthing babies. Tessa thrived in this community. She had always been good with people, and she quickly became known as someone who could be counted on in a crisis. She helped deliver babies, nurse the sick, organized barn raisings, and quilting bees. Yates, despite his hermit tendencies, found himself drawn into the social fabric as well. The men respected his knowledge of the land and his skill as a hunter and tracker. He became someone they turned to for advice. But no matter how busy life got, Yates and Tessa always made time for each other. Every evening on the porch, every Sunday afternoon, hike in the mountains while a neighbor watched the children, every stolen kiss in the garden or the barn. They had built not just a family, but a partnership, and they protected it fiercely. When Jacob was 10, he asked his father to teach him to track and hunt. Yates took him out into the mountains for a week, just the two of them, and came back with a son who walked taller and a father who beamed with pride. Jacob had brought down his first deer, and Yates told the story to anyone who would listen. Sarah turned into a beautiful, headstrong girl who could ride as well as any boy, and was not afraid to speak her mind. She drove Tessa to distraction with her wild ways, but Yates only laughed and said she was exactly like her mother. He taught her to shoot and track right alongside her brothers, refusing to limit her just because she was a girl. Daniel was the quiet one, always thinking, always watching. He loved books, which were precious and rare in the mountains, and Yates made sure to bring back new ones whenever he went to town. The boy could read by the time he was 4 and devoured every word he could find. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when food ran low and they had to ration carefully. There was the year Sarah got scarlet fever and they thought they might lose her. There were arguments and struggles and moments of frustration, but through it all, the love remained constant. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Tessa by taking her on a trip to Denver. It was the farthest she had traveled since coming to Nebraska, and the city felt huge and overwhelming after so many years in the mountains. But Yates held her hand through the crowded streets and showed her wonders she had only read about. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, saw a play at a theater. For 3 days, they were just Yates and Tessa, not Mama and Papa, not homesteaders with 100 responsibilities. On their last night in Denver, as they lay in the hotel bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city, Yates turned to her and said, "Do you ever regret it? Staying in the mountains? You could have had a life in town with nice dresses and social events and all the things women are supposed to want." Tessa propped herself up on her elbow and looked down at him. He was graying now, silver, threading through his dark hair and beard, lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. I have never regretted it for a single moment," she said firmly. "Not when it is hard, not when I am tired, not when I have to haul water in the winter or chase a goat that got loose. That life in the mountains, that is my life, Yates. You and the children and the cabin and the garden and all of it. That is where I belong. You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she kissed him softly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing, and I would choose you, choose us, every single time." He pulled her down and kissed her properly, deep and thorough, and they made love in that hotel bed with the same passion they had shared on their wedding night. Some things, Tessa thought as she moved with him, never changed, and thank God for that. They returned to the mountains and their children and their life. The years continued to pass. Jacob grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, steady and reliable. At 18, he married a girl from a neighboring homestead, a sweet thing named Emma, who fit into their family perfectly. Sarah remained stubbornly single, claiming she had no interest in any of the boys around and might just become a spinster who lived in the mountains and raised horses. Daniel decided he wanted to be a teacher and started helping the younger children in the area with their lessons. Tessa and Yates became grandparents when Jacob and Emma welcomed a baby girl. Holding that tiny infant, Tessa was struck by how much her life had changed. She was 40 years old now, her blonde hair threaded with silver, her hands marked by years of hard work. But she was happy, deeply and completely happy in a way her younger self could never have imagined. "We did well," Yates said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Their children were grown, or nearly so. The cabin they had built together stood strong and weathered. The garden was lush with vegetables. The barn held horses and a milk cow and chickens. They had built a life from nothing but determination and love. "We did," Tessa agreed, lacing her fingers through his. "When I think about that day the bandits attacked, how scared I was, how certain I was that my life was over, I'm amazed at how wrong I was. My life was not ending, it was beginning." "For both of us," Yates said. "I was not really living before you came. I was just existing, hiding from the world. You brought me back to life, Tessa." She looked at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and felt her heart swell with love. "You saved me first. You gave me everything you had when you had no reason to. You took in a group of strangers and showed them kindness when the world had shown them cruelty. And you gave me a family, a reason to wake up in the morning, a purpose beyond just surviving." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Those bandits took everything you had, and I gave you everything I had. But I think I got the better end of that deal. Love. I think I got the better end by far." Tessa smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Then we really are even." "Even," he agreed. "Always and forever, even." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire, Tessa leaned her head on her husband's broad shoulder and thought about the strange and beautiful path her life had taken, from loss to love, from emptiness to fullness, from a woman who had nothing to a woman who had everything that mattered. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging around them, witnesses to their love story. And as darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of it. Not the fear, not the pain, not the hardship, because all of it had led her here, to this porch, with this man, surrounded by the life they had built together. And that, she thought, as Yates pulled her closer, was worth everything. Years continued their steady march forward, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. When Tessa was 45, she realized with some surprise that she was pregnant again. At first, she thought it could not be true, that she was too old, that it must be something else. But the doctor confirmed it, and once again she found herself preparing to welcome a new life. This pregnancy was her hardest yet. Her body, which had carried 3 children before, protested this late addition. She was sick for months, tired all the time, her back aching constantly. Yates worried himself nearly sick over her, hovering until she threatened to make him sleep in the barn if he did not give her some space. "I am fine," she insisted for the 100th time as he tried to make her lie down. "Women have been having babies at my age since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," he said stubbornly, "and not if I have anything to say about it." But the baby came in the spring, a tiny girl with blonde hair and blue eyes who looked nothing like any of their other children. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented. Hope that love could still bring new life. Hope that their family could still grow. Hope that even when you thought your story was complete, God might have one more chapter to write. Sarah, now 21 and still unmarried, took to her baby sister with unexpected enthusiasm. She helped care for Hope, played with her for hours, told her stories about the mountains. Watching her fierce, independent daughter coo over the baby, Tessa felt her heart might burst with love. Jacob and Emma had 3 children now, and they had built a cabin just a mile down the valley. Daniel had gone to the city to study teaching, but came home every summer, bringing books and stories of the wider world. The family that Tessa and Yates had started had grown and branched, roots running deep into the mountain soil. When Tessa was 50 and Hope was 5 years old, Yates started having pains in his chest. At first, he brushed them off as indigestion or overwork, but they grew worse and more frequent, and Tessa finally insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis was grim. His heart was failing, weakened by years of hard living and the lingering effects of old war wounds. The doctor gave him maybe 5 years if he was careful, less if he was not. Tessa refused to accept it. She researched every remedy she could find, made him rest even when he protested, monitored everything he ate. but she could see him slowing down, see the gray tinge to his skin, see the way he had to stop and catch his breath after simple tasks. It terrified her in a way nothing else ever had. "I am not ready," she told him one night as they lay in bed, his arm around her shoulders. "I am not ready to lose you, Yates. I do not know how to do this life without you." "You are the strongest person I know," he said, his voice still strong even if his body was failing. "You survived an attack that killed others. You built a life from nothing. You bore 4 children and raised them to be good people. You can survive anything, Tessa Fletcher Sutherland." "But I do not want to survive without you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You are my heart, Yates. You are everything." He held her tighter, and she felt wetness on the top of her head where his face pressed against her hair. "And you are mine. You have been since the day you decided to stay. Since the day you looked at this rough mountain man and saw something worth loving." They clung to each other in the dark, both crying now, both terrified of the future that was coming whether they wanted it or not. But Yates Sutherland was stubborn, and he refused to go gentle into that good night. He lived not 5 years, but 7. 7 more years of watching his children grow, of holding his grandchildren, of sitting on the porch with his wife and watching the sunsets. He was there when Sarah finally met a man who matched her wild spirit, a horse trader named Michael, who could make her laugh and was not intimidated by her fierce independence. He was there when Daniel returned from the city with a wife, a quiet woman named Catherine, who loved books as much as Daniel did. He was there when Jacob's eldest son brought down his first deer, continuing the tradition. He made it to see Hope turn 12, a bright, happy girl who loved the mountains as much as her father did. And then, on a cool October morning when the aspens were turning gold, Yates Sutherland took his last breath with his wife holding his hand, and his children gathered around his bed. "I love you," Tessa whispered as she felt him slip away. "I love you. I love you. I love you. Love you," he breathed back, so quiet she almost missed it. "Always." And then he was gone. The grief was enormous, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. Tessa felt like half of her soul had been ripped away. For weeks she barely functioned, moving through the days in a fog. Her children took care of her, brought her food, made sure she got out of bed. They did not tell her to move on or get over it. They just held her while she cried and let her grieve. Slowly, painfully, Tessa learned to live with the loss. She would never get over it, she knew. You did not get over losing the love of your life. But she could learn to carry the grief, to make space for it alongside the love and the memories. She found comfort in the life they had built together, in their children and grandchildren, in the cabin that still smelled like him, in the mountains that had witnessed their love story. On the first anniversary of his death, Tessa climbed to the highest point on their property, a rocky outcrop that overlooked the whole valley. She stood there as the sun set, the wind whipping her silver hair, and she talked to him. "I am still here," she said to the mountains and the sky and whatever might lie beyond. "I am still living the life we built. Our grandchildren are thriving. Hope is becoming a fine young woman. Everyone is well and happy, and they all remember you with so much love." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I miss you every moment of every day. But I am grateful, Yates. Grateful for every single day we had together. Grateful that I stayed that day instead of leaving. Grateful that you gave me everything you had and called it even." She stood there until the stars came out, feeling closer to him than she had since he died. And when she finally made her way back down the mountain, she felt a small measure of peace. Tessa lived for another 15 years after Yates passed. She watched her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She taught Hope everything she knew about healing and herbs, and Hope became the valley's midwife and healer. She sat on the porch every evening, sometimes alone, sometimes surrounded by family, and watched the sunsets paint the mountains in fire and gold. She never remarried. Some of the widowers in the area tried courting her, but she politely declined. She had had the love of her life. She did not need or want another. What she and Yates had shared was once in a lifetime, and she was content with the memories. When she was 71 years old, Tessa woke up one morning feeling different, lighter somehow, like gravity had lost its hold on her. She rose and dressed and went through her day, saying extra goodbyes to her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, though she did not tell them why. That evening, she climbed up to the porch and sat in the rocking chair Yates had made for her so many years ago. As the sun set behind the mountains in a glory of orange and pink and gold, Tessa closed her eyes and let herself remember. The attack, the burning wagon, the mountain man on his horse, appearing like a miracle, the way he had given her everything when she had nothing, the way they had fallen in love slowly, surely, completely, their wedding night, their children, the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. "I am ready now," she whispered to the evening air. "I am ready to see you again." Hope found her the next morning, still in the rocking chair, a peaceful smile on her face. She was gone, but she did not look sad. She looked content, like she had finally come home after a long journey. They buried her next to Yates on the hill overlooking the valley, under the aspens that turned gold every fall. The whole community came to pay their respects, 3 generations of Sutherlands and the countless other lives that Tessa and Yates had touched over the years. At the funeral, Jacob stood and told the story of how his parents had met, how his mother had lost everything and his father had given her everything, how they had built a life and a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. "They showed us what love looks like," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Real love, the kind that gives without expecting anything in return, the kind that builds rather than takes, the kind that lasts beyond death." He looked out at the gathered crowd, at his siblings and his children and grandchildren, and all the people who had been touched by Tessa and Yates' love. They called it even, but the truth is, we are all richer for having known them. We are all blessed by the life they built and the love they shared. As they lowered Tessa's coffin into the ground next to her husband's, Hope sang a song her mother had taught her, a song about mountains and love and coming home. Her voice was pure and clear, rising into the clean mountain air, and there was not a dry eye in the crowd. That evening, as the family gathered at the cabin for a meal, someone noticed something remarkable. 2 aspens that grew at the edge of the property, trees that had always been separate, had somehow intertwined their roots. They stood together now, leaning toward each other, branches tangled together, 2 trees that had become one. "Just like Mama and Papa," Sarah said quietly, and everyone nodded. Years passed as they always do. The cabin stood strong, passed down through the generations, the valley filled with more families, more homes, more life. But on the hill overlooking it all, under the golden aspens, Tessa and Yates Sutherland rested together. And every fall, when the leaves turned gold, the descendants would gather at their graves and tell the story. The story of how bandits took everything she had, how a mountain man gave her everything he had and called it even, and how that simple exchange of kindness bloomed into a love that changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. A love that proved that sometimes losing everything is just the first step toward finding what you were always meant to have. A love that showed that the greatest gifts come not from what we take, but from what we give. And in the end, that love lived on. In the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values. In the cabin that still stood strong. In the mountains that had witnessed their story. In the intertwined aspens that stood as a living monument to 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. Bandits took everything she had. A mountain man gave her everything he had and called it even. But the truth was, what they had given each other was worth more than everything in the world combined. They had given each other love, family, purpose, and a lifetime of memories. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. The mountains stood eternal, as they always had and always would. The seasons turned. Life continued. But the love story of Tessa Fletcher and Yates Sutherland endured, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. That sometimes losing everything is how we find what truly matters. And that sometimes, in the wild and rugged places of the world, Love blooms in the most unexpected ways and changes everything forever.